Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for organising the event today. Does this sound all right now? I'm not too loud. Right. As you may be aware, I'm the only Irish member of ENVI, the Environment Committee, and I've worked closely with campaign groups and NGOs over the past 5 years on important legislation coming through the Parliament. I was also a local councillor in Dún Laoghaire Down County Council. As we've only a short speaking time, I'll run through some of my work on environment issues. I successfully tabled legislative amendments raising standards for biofuels to limit their impact on food production. But we need more work on biofuels, and the battle will continue. Because of the damage being caused by the massive palm tree plantations in Asia, in 2010 I tabled an amendment on the summer report on food labelling, ensuring that consumers were aware that palm oil is present in 40% of our food products. This year, I supported a reduction of domestic greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% in the vote on the 2030 framework for climate and energy policy, but unfortunately this was voted down. A lot of my work is with environmental NGOs and local campaign groups. I've hosted meetings, for instance, on sustainable food for the Green Foundation Ireland, and there will be another one of those if I'm re-elected. This year and last, I devoted time to working with constituents in Ireland East regarding the proposals to build industrial-scale wind farms and the associated pylon grids. I met with the Energy Commissioner and lodged a formal complaint with him regarding the Irish government's approach to wind energy and exporting wind energy. I worked very closely with Birdwatch Ireland on the Common Fisheries Policy and with Oxfam on biofuels, and I raised serious issues with the Commission and was able to achieve some successes, such as the sea lice discovered by Friends of the Irish Environment, where problems were concealed by the Department of Agriculture. I helped stall the demolition of houses on Vicar Street in Kilkenny for a while. As of yesterday, my office is still working on this issue, unfortunately. I lodged detailed complaints to the Commission about the ongoing problem of the illegal dump in West Wicklow and the wind turbines planned for the coastline at Wicklow, which are going ahead without adequate environmental assessments. There are many other important issues coming up in the next term: energy targets, the EU-US trade agreement, and we can address these in the Q&A. Thank you. Yes, I've organised everything in bullet points because my mother used to say I had a grasshopper mind, and this isn't the place where we have to keep to time. So to answer that question, I'd ensure that adequate financing is available for sustainable development at European and international level. I support a greener and fairer CAP, and I've worked with some of you on that legislation. Climate change, pushing for ambitious binding targets, the EU-US trade agreement, the TTIP, ensuring that environmental legislation and citizens' health are adequately protected, and for example, we don't want to weaken food labelling regulations, and I think there's a big problem emerging with the TTIP in that regard. Continual support for the Common Fisheries Policy and securing an end to overfishing and delivery of sustainable fish stocks. And that also is the protection and restoration of marine ecosystems. Promoting sustainable water management globally, that's the EU Water Framework Directive, and ensuring that challenges with the implementation of the Water Framework Directive are solved and its legal provisions strengthened during the review of the directive in 2018. And reducing our impact on the environment, i.e. our footprints, and decreasing support for reduction in food waste by 50% by 2020. Of course, one of the things that I do is constituency work and working with NGOs, and that would be my intention, certainly, almost immediately, to begin to do that again. So I find that's where I can do the best work. Thank you very much. Yes, I'll support a 55% reduction target, and I supported a 50% one before, but a higher one would be better. I think we need to ensure that the 2020 targets for renewables and GHG reductions and energy efficiency are met. All these things are all very well, but I met a leading environmental campaigner in Brussels Airport a few weeks ago who said, sorry? Brussels Airport. Brussels. who said that it was just in the airport, and he said that he thought the top-down approach, in other words, international negotiations, were not going to work with regard to this. So we have to actually do stuff here in this country, and one of them is retrofitting. I think Eamon mentioned that. We need to spend at least 30 billion in retrofitting buildings. A permanent solution, many jobs connected with it. We need to make sure that we are going down that road, and if you like, I would prefer that than to using too many other kinds of energy, decarbonising the system in other ways. So we need to do that. Also, climate change legislation here. If we're going to talk about the politics of power, I made a huge effort before the last government fell to put pressure on the Labour Party to support that legislation. I don't know what would have happened. I might have succeeded, but the government fell before that climate change legislation went through. And that shows you that's what we're at. That's what we're at. We're at pressure politics, and it comes down to that sometimes. And I did my best, and I'll never know what would have happened because the government fell. We know why, all sorts of reasons. Well, I'd support the full and immediate implementation of the Natura 2000 network, including Europe's seas and marine environment, and the effective financing for the management and restoration of all sites. And of course, I support the Birds and Habitats Directive, in addition to implementation of other policies such as the Common Agricultural Policy or Regional Policy, which should merge and contribute to European and international objectives of halting biodiversity loss by 2020. Paul has already spoken about the difficulties of CAP and the vested interests involved in it. And I would focus on the full implementation of the EU biodiversity strategy, taking into account areas like agriculture and, again, aquatic and marine sectors. And the strategy should cover overseas territories. And then we have the UN Convention on Biological Diversity and the Framework Convention on Climate Change. I think we need to get engaged there even more so. So I support the commitments within these conventions. But most of all, I'd work with Karen again, and I've worked with you many times in the last 5 years, and that's where I think things can really be done, and wherever you are, I will follow, as it were. Yes, we all know at this point the damage that climate change is doing. I don't think I need to go into that. It is an interesting question. What is a steady state economy? And are we talking about something called zero economic growth, which is a hugely controversial issue? You have to try and define what it is. I think what will happen actually is that when there is, let's look at the example of China. You have an absolute confrontation between economic growth and environmental disaster in some of the areas of China, where some of the cities are becoming almost uninhabitable in terms of air quality, and it's going to restrict inward investment. That's what I hear anyway, in places like Beijing and other cities. If we look at that, there is unfortunately a kind of natural way in which this zero growth will be reached, and I don't know if there's any other way of doing it. As human beings, we seem to need disasters before anything happens, but maybe there's a possibility for green energy revolution in here, that we can actually make money, we can cause economies to grow by using green energy and therefore saving some of this. But how far down that road are we really, and what kind of pressure will have to come about before we reach it? I think we have to be realistic. That's why I mentioned China. Some cities are virtually becoming uninhabitable. Yes, fracking. My badge, Frack-Free Europe, here. I've certainly supported that. I think a comprehensive EIA must, without a doubt, take place before any exploratory licence for shale gas is issued. And I've always supported the inclusion of mandatory impact assessments within the EIA directive. We do not have a very good record with EIAs generally in Ireland. And I'm a supporter of Frack-Free Ireland, and I signed the Declaration of Opposition to Unconventional Fossil Fuels. fracking and free trade agreements. I think we need to integrate into existing EU legislation precautions specific to unconventional fossil fuels and to abide by the precautionary principles as formulated in the Treaty on the European Union. And we need to support a moratorium on the use of fracking for all existing and future projects for exploration or exploitation of unconventional fossil fuels. I'm aware of Pat Rabbitt's position. I just hope that it is followed by any previous government, any following government, whoever that is. That's one of the problems we have here.
Nessa, did you vote for it?
I certainly didn't intend to. If I did, it was a mistake. And I have made mistakes voting. I'm getting my assistant to check what happened there. Because I actually think that TTIP is actually quite, in its present form, is quite sinister in terms of what's happening around it. And I recommend everyone to go on the website of Corporate Europe Observatory to look at the leaked position papers, which basically is a recipe for lobbyists of every kind, which some of us have been battling for 5 years, huge business lobbies, to influence the negotiations in a way that it doesn't surprise me, because I've seen it in many other ways. It is so difficult to deal with and so sinister that I don't think that, it's like what Emer said, I don't think I could support it anymore, simply because I'm suspicious of what's going on. And what you do there is you've got to expose this issue, and there is a leaked position paper, and as Paul said, we know what's going on behind the scenes. The only way to deal with a situation in which none of these people have any of our interests in heart, it's only big corporations, is to expose them out into the light. They don't like it, and we've all seen it with tobacco lobbyists, food lobbying. That's the only way I could think of over 5 years of doing it, and it is a sinister piece of legislation. And I certainly hope, as I said, I'm not sure what I voted on, but I don't think that I supported ISDS. If we're MEPs, one of the things we do, and I've no doubt how I voted in this area, was we oppose amendments in the European Parliament that seek to introduce GMO, and I voted with the Green Group on the issue of the Honey Directive and Plant Breeding Report, which we rejected as they contained elements and promoted the use of GMOs. It was very controversial too. The issue of GMOs is controversial. There are vested interests, as Paul said, involved, and a lot of very heated meetings on the Environment Committee about it. And we need to introduce amendments and policies that seek to protect and strengthen traditional crop breeding. In other words, you go one direction and then you also strengthen it from the other end too. Maybe we need to name and shame at national level parties that actively promote GMOs, whoever they may be. And oh, well, we'll just, yes, some of them, yes, and who knows who isn't here. We raise awareness among stakeholders and policymakers about protecting non-GM food. And we need to expand the reasons that member states can invoke to ban GMOs, which now include environmental grounds, the protection of biodiversity, and risks of pesticide resistance or socio-economic risks. And by doing this, we can go as far as we want, but it does require that MEPs vote in that way. And there are a lot of vested interests, once again, in many industries that we're up against. What have I done in this area? I've supported funding to local authorities and NGOs that are promoting cycling, especially in Dublin. And I sent the Commission a PQ earlier in 2010, questioning whether cycling projects in Dublin or any other parts of Ireland would be eligible to qualify for funding under the EU Structural and Cohesion Funds, which set aside 600 million for the implementation of investment in cycle infrastructure across Europe. That's one of the things MEPs can do, is go looking for funding. And I questioned the Commission over its plans to create a European bicycle office position in light of the Action Plan on Urban Mobility, and modelling it on the likes of the position that was created in Dublin City Council. And we in the European Parliament recently voted last month on modifications to the design of trucks to make them safer. And the new law would mean streamlining lorry cabs, allowing a reduction of the driver's blind spots. In 1984, I was run over on Thomas Street by a HGV without such a vision, and I came within inches of losing my life on a bicycle. And so it's always been, and imagine all that time, nothing has really been done to change it, and I just will never forget that instant. And I think I wrote a letter to the council way back then when there was no internet saying, what are you doing about these trucks? They can't see cyclists. So, we've got to take those issues on board. Yes, I think that's an interesting point, because we were talking earlier about the clash between the economy and economic growth and environment. There is also a potential clash with environmental issues and poverty. And one of the areas that this is that concerns me a great deal here is where the money from the carbon tax is going. It's supposed to be ring-fenced. It's supposed to be ring-fenced for, if you like, in its own area. It hasn't been. And here's the problem with a carbon tax. The price of coal is going to increase by a very significant amount, and we haven't taken that on board because it changed in May. We all know why we have carbon taxes. However, we also have a very serious issue of fuel poverty, an ongoing and future emergency. Let's say we emerge, which I'm very dubious about, I have to say, in the near future, from this into a recovery. We are going to recover in some way, but a whole lot of people will be left behind, and fuel poverty is a serious issue. So it's all very well to talk about carbon taxes, but should we not be using those funds to actually subsidise fuel? Because I tell you, this isn't on the agenda in the newspapers and the media yet, but it is on the ground, and poverty in general. So I'd have a big question mark, and I've no one to ask in here. There are no politicians left from the present government, but I would like to ask just exactly what are we doing about fuel poverty? Yes, I actually have a sort of a question. Since we're talking about European directors as well, perhaps there's some way we can confront Dublin City Council with European law. There's all kinds of issues with the landfill directive, the pool bag incinerator. I don't know if there's ever an issue that seems to me to be a no-win situation now, it's that one. And how are we going to manage it? We're still not recycling enough. We're just in a mess with it generally. But in terms of the issue of waste management, can we reverse that? I'd like to know from somebody, can we reverse this situation, or is it irreversible?